Hey guys, welcome to Founder Story, where we bring you the stories of how your favorite brands and companies were started, told by the creators themselves. I'm Dan Larsen, and I'm very excited to bring you this podcast. We have lots of great interviews lined up with some amazing people. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts, so you don't miss an episode. First, music from my German brother, Andrew Applepie. Go to andrewapplepie.com to get links to all of his music. Think of a better person to interview for the first episode than my dad, Danny Larsen. He's been successfully running Universal Business Systems for 30 years with his brother John. In this episode, you'll learn how they've been able to retain customers for decades, the challenges and successes they've had along the way. I hope you love it. Here's my dad, Danny Larsen. Okay, we're going to fast forward in their story. The year is 2008. They've been in business now for 25 years selling phone systems to small and medium businesses. The problem is the economy is tanking and their customers are leaving left and right. They need to make a change from their traditional systems because their vendor, Tataran, well, their technology is outdated. While the economy is screeching to a halt, the technology is speeding up, and IP phones that connect over the internet are becoming the next big thing. How my dad and the Universal Business Systems team took advantage of this new technology? Well, it might surprise you.
What happened kind of happened to everyone. And part of it was technology, and then part of it was the recession in 2008. We didn't have a lot of money because we were really hating it at that time. And so I remember I took a broken PC and figured out how to make it work.
By stitching together open source stuff and technology that you learned about from having now done this for 20 years at this point, right?
Yeah. Some of the voicemail systems that we started messing around with Linux on some of the voicemail systems that we'd used. So I'd had about I don't know, 5 or 10 years of playing around with Linux. And so I was familiar with that. And most of the distros of the open source IP systems were on Linux. And so I loaded some of these on this broken old PC. I think it had 256 meg of RAM. It was a 386.
It's not an expensive computer.
It was a broken old computer, and I loaded that on there, and I was playing around with it in the office, and I had come up with a couple of IP phones. At the time, there was a company called Astra that, and they're still around, that we bought a couple of their IP phones, and so we could play around with them. And then I had a couple of old broken cheap phones.
You're kind of staging the system together to see, like, hey, is this a feasible thing that we could stand up and use in real life?
And John was completely against it. And at this time, since Telrad was going out of business, we were looking for a new manufacturer. And at that time, John had also sold one to a company in American Fork. And I said, I'm not doing another one of these.
Because you knew, in your gut, you knew this wasn't going to be a good solution.
I just couldn't hack it because it was such a nightmare that. And I said, look, this other thing is better, and it doesn't cost us anything. We can buy some hardware. We can buy some little rack servers, and I can build this on them, and it's better. And he was dead set against it, but I just
wouldn't let it go.
Wouldn't do it. So he'd already signed up this deal, and he'd already sold it as the Tataran system, and I refused. So we ended up going down and putting in our first new system with this with this.
This customer that you had originally sold the other system to, you convinced John to try your new setup.
We had done one smaller one at an insurance company in St. George, just a little one.
And that one was your first live customer using this new system. Did you see that like as kind of a test run? Like, hey, let's prove that this can work before we start selling this to everybody? Or
no? During this time, I had to go back to Tataran's school for us to sell their product. All of the old legacy stuff, you used to have to go to their school or to their classes and get certified on their systems, and at this time I'd been certified on a couple of other systems, but I had to go back and get certified on theirs and on their IP system. And while I was there, I'd already had a couple of years of playing around with this new stuff, and when I went to their class, I realized this is way behind what I've been playing with in the office. With this other stuff, is what they're selling is way behind, and so when I came back and from Tataran's training, and we had this other job to put in, I finally convinced John to do it, and he didn't want to at all, but we went and we put it in for these guys, and it wasn't super smooth, but it was way better than the
but
other.
It had promise
than the real estate office that we had.
So why was John apprehensive about the new system? Just because it was more of like a homegrown, unproven thing, or
because for 20 something years we'd been selling a manufactured product where they had salespeople come out and they had backing of their technicians, and they had their engineers,
more established thing,
who had created their systems, and supposedly all of this support and all of this. And now going to this other, it was basically like saying, okay, now not only are you the manufacturer, you're the support, you're the technician, you're the everything. And so
when something doesn't work, you don't have somebody to call really to say, help me figure this out, or at least that it's not as like formalized process. You kind of have to figure it out because it's something that you made with a bunch of other
there are people on forums and things like that on the internet, but there's no company that was sitting out there that I knew of, at least, that I could call up and say, hey, this doesn't work. I'm
customer 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the error that I'm getting. How do I fix it?
What should I do?
Yeah.
It doesn't work. What should I do? I can go on a forum and ask some guy, and he might get, somebody, and somebody might respond, or they might not.
Okay.
We were selling companies like Mitel and Northern Telecom. We were selling big manufacturers, equipment, and Telrad. All those are big manufacturers with a lot of people.
So at that time, and maybe this has changed over time, but like, what's the relationship between like the system and the phones that are offered? Like when you created your new system, were there only specific phones that you could sell, or did you have a pretty good range that you could choose from?
One of the beauties of the open source stuff that attracted me to it so much was the fact that all of the older systems, you were limited. If you sold a Mitel system, you had to put a Mitel phone on it. If you sold a Telrad system, you had to put a Telrad phone on it. Intertel, all of the manufacturers, they were proprietary, and you had to use that. Where this open source stuff, there started to be several manufacturers like Grandstream and Astra who were open.
So in a way, you're a lot more flexible.
Yeah, so we were open to anything that was, and more stuff was coming all the time.
Yeah.
Where the open source stuff, if you got enough to figure out how to make it work, you can offer it, or you can license it yourself. But we decided we're not going to license anything. We're going to give everybody everything that it has.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we just looked to find what we could find is the best phone to put on that system. But the beauty of it was also, if we find a better one tomorrow,
you can switch.
We can switch, or we can offer it to people. So we weren't locked in. And so that was a lot of the beauty of doing that, plus not having any licensing. And so basically we could build a system for the cost of the server, and
which you proved you could run on a computer you were ready to throw away.
That original one was. But
wow.
One of the most interesting stories is we had a customer running off of a server that was about a Celeron type processor with 2 gigs of RAM. That we had a customer on one of those original servers who got 300 phones working off of that thing.
At what point did you realize, like, this is gonna work?
To me, I knew when I was at Tataran school.
That was the moment.
When I was at Tataran school and I saw the way they were doing it, and I saw that this other that we were doing was better. It's better in the way that if you're willing to take all of it on yourself.
At what point did you know, though, that you could be successful taking all that stuff on?
So as the internet got better and better, the people who were doing the hosting providing, rather than having a T1 out to each person's site, they just have their regular internet. Where we do that in a similar way, but we still put an individual server in at each customer site. And for the larger companies, I think that's a big advantage for the larger companies. So as we started to do this, we realized we can provide the phone lines as well with this service. And so what we basically do is we provide the telephone lines and all of the telephone service and the server and their equipment, the telephone, the 911 service, all of the service, so the caller ID, and everything for the customers. So that way, we sell a really basic package to the customer and a really basic price to the customer. We basically say, okay, this package is $100 for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
We don't tear it all apart and say it's $10 a phone per month, or it's this amount. We just have a
base price that's super simple,
flat base price that we charge. And the beauty of it is that especially the customer who has low traffic but thinks that he needs to have a lot of capacity. So say that a small business owner's out there and he thinks he needs to have 6 lines. Maybe he had 6 lines and he had a T1 from the phone company for his internet. He might have been paying $600 or $700 a month.
Wow.
And or even sometimes more. And they didn't care how much he used it, but he didn't use it very much. But he was afraid that if he didn't have the capacity, that he would miss calls on busy days. So the beauty of what we did was say, you can have as many calls as your internet can take. And as the internet became better, then these guys could get 10 calls at once or get 15 calls at once over their internet service, but they weren't being charged to have 15 lines. So at that time, the internet pricing was also going down, and a lot of the providers were providing better service, and it was getting a little less expensive.
What do you see, or what are some of the milestones or kind of the big successes that you've had? Like, particularly like in these last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, with your new system?
Well, I think a couple of them really poke out. We have a VA loan company. They're the company that had the server with 2 gigs of RAM. They started out and they had a larger Telrad system, but because the market kind of had troubles, they had gone down to about 30 phones. So when we gave them our new system, they only had about 30 phones. Well, we watched that grow 10 phones, 20 phones at a time to where it got to around 300. It's now around 400.
Wow.
And they have 10 offices. They have an office in New York, 2 in Las Vegas, office in California. They're all across, but they're still all served off of that one server. I remember adding the 40th phone on that and saying, I don't know if this will run 40 phones.
Right. Because you'd never done it before. Nobody had. And
there were people who had done it, but I don't know that there were people who had done 300 and 400 phones off of a server like that. And we didn't know. We didn't know, well, where's the point? And
you don't know what the capacity is until you hit it, right?
And then I just finally stopped worrying about it, and we just kept putting things on there. We had to make some adjustments and learn some things, and later we put a lot bigger, faster server on there. But that was a big thing because we just didn't know, and we would have never dared to try to do it if it had presented itself as here we need to put in a 300 phone system. So now we have so
that building up that confidence over time was important, because if they would have come to you at that time and said, hey, we need to do 400 phones, you would have probably not dared to even try that. Whereas where you were able to grow with them, you had that kind of that success over time and learning that, hey, this is gonna work.
So now we have a lot of systems that are I don't think they'd be considered large business, but they're medium business. One of the big successes that I feel like is having Pride Transport on that. We've had them since 1980 something. They've been on a phone system, and when they expanded and built their new buildings, and we went in and the whole building's wired beautiful, and they have a beautiful new system in there, and it's great. So some of those like that are, to me, those are a big success just because it's been so many years.
Yeah, and the relationship that they've stuck with you, you've been there for them for that long. It's pretty awesome. I don't think a lot of businesses now have customers that are that long running, so that's amazing. Cool. Thank you so much for being on the first episode. I appreciate it. It was only fitting that you were on this episode. Thank you for helping me figure out all this crazy audio stuff. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Hope most of this doesn't end up on the editing room floor.
No, I'm just going to throw it all straight out there. I think it'd be the easiest. I still have to learn how to edit. So thanks, Dad.
Sure.
What I loved about my dad's story is that they completely changed their business. They moved from using a big manufacturer to creating their own system with open source materials. In the process, they also learned that they could offer phone lines as well, and moved to a simple subscription pricing model, which resulted in tremendous growth for their business. Thanks so much for listening to the first episode of Founder Story. It means a lot to me. Don't forget to subscribe. The outro music of today's episode was written and performed by my dad. You can listen to his new album titled No Time for the Blues. Get it on Apple Music and Amazon.